There are times when vendors don't follow straightforward invoicing procedures, which can be challenging to your accounts payable department. In this tutorial, we're going to demonstrate how flexibility of the Sage ERP Accpac purchase order system allows you to process some offbeat vendor invoicing scenarios. We're going to present two examples, and in the first, our vendor receives our PO, they ship the items, and we receive them into our warehouse. Then, for some reason, our vendor breaks the single shipment into two invoices. In the second example, we issue two separate POs to our vendor, and we subsequently receive the items in two separate shipments. However, rather than invoicing each shipment separately, our vendor puts both shipments on a single invoice. For this tutorial, we're going to use the Sage ERP Accpac portal introduced in version 6, and we'll go ahead and log in. You could just as easily use the classic Sage Accpac desktop user interface that's also included in version 6, so it's your choice, but again, we'll use the portal. So now let's jump right in and get started with the first scenario, processing vendor invoices when your vendor puts two separate shipments on a single invoice. Notice that we've already set up some shortcuts to some PO functions, and these are the ones that we'll be using in our examples. We'll begin by creating a purchase order, so let's click the Purchase Order Entry shortcut. We'll issue a new PO here, and to start, we'll enter our vendor, number 1200 Chloride Systems. And we're going to ship to location 1 and bill to location 1. Now we'll move down to the detail grid, and using the finder, let's select the fluorescent desk lamp. And the quantity will be 2. And scrolling over, we can see that our cost is $20.297. And now we can see the total is $40.59, which is what we expect. We can also open the Totals tab and see the tax, if any, and here we have $3.35 in taxes. So let's go ahead and post the PO, and we don't need to print it for this demo, and we'll close the window. Now let's assume that we've sent the PO to our vendor, the items have shipped, and they've arrived in our warehouse. So now we'll open Receipt Entry and receive the items. We'll go to the PO number field, open the finder, scroll to the bottom, and there's our PO number 33. And notice that when we select the PO, most of the receipt information autofills off the purchase order. Knowing that the two desk lamps have come into our warehouse, we'll hit Receive All, and the two anticipated items appear in the grid and at the expected price. And taking a quick look at the Totals tab, it shows the $3.35 in taxes that you may recall were on the PO. So now let's post the receipt, and again we'll skip printing and close the receipt entry window. Now let's assume a couple of days have passed and the vendor's invoice arrives, and upon examination, we notice their invoice total does not match our expected amount. Apparently, they've only invoiced us for one of the two desk lamps that we received. Not to worry though, we can deal with this. So let's go ahead and process the invoice, and we'll open PO Invoice Entry and enter 123789 off the vendor's invoice. And looking at the receipt document, it shows number 83, which we'll select from the finder, and the form autofills from there. Now because they've only invoiced us for one of the two items, we'll change the invoice total amount and enter the amount off the vendor's invoice, which is $21.98. And down in the grid, we'll change the quantity invoiced to 1. Next, and this is a critical step, we need to change the fully invoiced field on the detail line from yes to no. This will allow us to process the second invoice when it comes in for the balance of the goods. Now let's verify the totals, and here you can see that it's now $20.30 before tax, which is correct if we're being invoiced for only half the items. So now let's post the invoice, and we'll close the Posting Complete message and the invoice entry window. Continuing with our scenario, a few days later, the second invoice arrives from our vendor. So once again, we'll open Invoice Entry, and let's suppose that the number on the second invoice is 123800, and it's the same receipt number, So using the finder, we'll make the same selection as before. And in our scenario, the totals on the screen now match the total on the vendor's invoice. And this time, we'll leave fully invoiced set to yes, and now we'll post the invoice, close the message, and the window. And with that, we've completed the processing of a single receipt with multiple vendor invoices. Now we'll run through our second scenario where we receive 2 shipments from a supplier, but instead of receiving the typical invoice per shipment, our vendor sends one invoice that covers both shipments. To set up our example, we'll begin by entering a couple of POs, so we'll open purchase order entry. Let's use the same vendor, 1200 Chloride Systems, and we'll ship to location 1 and bill to location 1. Dropping down to the grid and opening the item finder, we'll select the fluorescent desk lamp, and let's put 10 of these on the PO. And hitting the insert key to start a new line, let's add a 13-watt mini fluorescent bulb, and we'll order 10 of them. Now let's post the PO, and no need to print, and we'll close the window. Continuing with our scenario, a few days later, the items on the PO arrive at our warehouse, so let's open receipt entry to receive the items. Here we'll repeat the same quick process of locating the purchase order, which was number 34, and again, the header and details autofill. And since our main focus here is to demonstrate the invoicing process, we won't dwell on the details here, we'll just receive all and post the receipt. Let's close the message and the window. Now we'll create a second purchase order, and importantly, it's for the same vendor, 1200, and ship to location 1 and bill to location 1. And this time, we'll issue a PO for halogen desk lights, and we'll order 10 of them. Now we'll post the PO, close the confirmation message, and the window. A few days later, the items arrive at our warehouse, so we'll go ahead and enter a receipt. Again, we'll quickly select the purchase order, and we'll receive all, and hit post, skip printing, and close the window. So now the setup of this scenario is complete. We've issued 2 separate POs to the same vendor, and we've subsequently received the items in 2 separate shipments. So now let's suppose that a few days pass and we receive an invoice from our vendor, Chloride Systems. Upon examination of our receipts paperwork and the vendor's invoice, we realize that Chloride Systems has put both shipments on this invoice rather than having a separate invoice for each shipment. So now let's walk through how to process the invoice under this scenario. To start, we'll open invoice entry and enter the invoice number off the paperwork, which is 123900. At this point, we're going to depart from the procedure we've been following, which has been skipping over the vendor number and entering the receipt number. The reason we can't do this here is that we have 2 receipts and the field only accommodates 1 receipt number. So instead, we'll enter our vendor 1200 Chloride Systems, and when we tab out of the field, notice that the From Multiple Receipts field becomes active. Let's check the box and notice that the receipt number field is now grayed out. So at this point, the only option we have is to click the Zoom button here, which opens this pop-up. And here we're able to enter multiple receipts, and we can type them in or use the finder. We'll use the finder to select receipt number 84, and we'll hit the Insert key, and now we'll look for receipt number 85. And now we'll hit the Invoice button and close the pop-up. And you can see that the items from both shipments have populated the item grid. The first 2 items are from the first receipt, and the last item is from the second receipt. At this point, you should of course verify the lines and amounts to ensure the invoice is correct. And now we'll post the invoice. And that's the procedure you would follow when processing an invoice that includes multiple receipts. And that completes our tutorial. So to recap, the Sage ERP Accpac PO module allows you to handle vendor invoicing even when the vendor does not adhere to the standard practice of sending 1 invoice per shipment. Give us a call if you need assistance with this or any other feature in your Sage ERP Accpac system. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Bye for now.